Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Hillary Dickman. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Admission for Marketing and Communications at Colorado College, and I'm also a parent of 2 college students.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Hillary and I continue our conversation of tips for students when it comes to their writing in their application. And then we'll continue on with our interview that we started last week with Peg Keogh, Chief Academic Officer at College Aid Pro, and we're discussing missed opportunities in the FAFSA and the CSS profile. And then we'll have the final part of my interview with Greg Zeiser on helping us to understand Elon University.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Hillary, I want to talk to you about something I've been thinking about a lot. I've been wanting to share this on the podcast, but I struggle with how to communicate this, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on it. So one of the things that I find in reading students' writing that really, I guess, just increases their desirability is if they come across very likable. But yet when you say that, it sounds like is this a popularity contest?
Yeah.
But I really think, like, have a stranger, somebody who doesn't know you that well, read that and think, is this a likable person? Like, I find, like, how often are you going to really fight for, advocate for, or get attached to someone who you don't find that likable? I doubt very often. I know I didn't when I was in admissions. Like the whole idea of, and some of it's combined with other things, right? You're likable because you have personal qualities that are going to add. You're likable because you're interesting, but the person for whom, boy, it would be fascinating to spend an hour over lunch with this person. Those are some of the ones that I find the most inspirational and compelling. Do you agree with that? Or what are your thoughts on that? Do you see the downside of, like, when I use that language, it sounds like, this is like a vote for who's the popular kid. I just want to know what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I am a person who often comes across, maybe not in this setting, but in other settings, as being pretty intense, which is can be the opposite of likable. And so I feel like I take this a little bit personally. And I think it's a really important question to ask. Where I have seen this make the biggest impact is when a student's grades kind of put them like where they shouldn't really be considered for admission, but they're so likable that we keep pushing them forward, right? And so, like, I can think of a specific student who was so likable that in multiple of their teacher and their counselor recommendation, there was mention of, every time the student's name comes up, everyone says, "Oh, I love so-and-so.
Sure.
This student's such a great student." They all have just gushing things to say about the student. And that was a student whose grades really should have put them out of contention, but I was able to keep pushing them forward, and they're coming to CC next year, because this is the kind of student, like, if teachers are saying, "I love this student is so likable, everyone wants to be around this student," well, like, they're probably going to graduate from here. They're going to be fine, right? Academically, they're not going to graduate magna cum laude. That's fine. All they had to do is get through.
And
And there's
their contributions in
yes,
the
I
dorm
mean,
room
they're
and the
the kind
dining
of,
halls,
yes,
everything.
they're the kind of student who brings a community together and who
Hmm.
makes our faculty members happy, right? Like, I want our
Yeah,
faculty members to be happy, even if this kid ends up getting a C in the class.
sure.
Like, the fact that the teachers like having the student in class tells me that our professors are probably also going to like having the student in class. And and I want that for our community. I want to have people around who are like that. It's very different when it's a student who is an AB student, or an A student. Like, at that point, they don't need to have sort of the added likability quality in order to find things to advocate for them on. It's more when the student is kind of out of the typical range of grades or the typical academic profile that likability can really help, I think.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I get backlash on this from the admission pros too, because it can
Mhm.
almost sort of diminish the
Yeah.
science and the art of the rubric, right? Like
Hmm.
I don't want people to think this is all total subjective,
Hmm.
right? Like we have a rigorous processes in place to give an academic rating and have a personal rating, what extracurricular rating, whatever. And it's
Yeah.
not just I can't just go off the reservation because I like this kid and rate what I run. And it can give that sort of overall vibe.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can't, right? Like, I
Sure.
can't change the students' academic ratings or even their personal ratings, and their likability is not part of their personal rating. This is not, it's not going to be an easy road for a student like that to be admitted, which is why we end up remembering the ones who are, right? Because it's rare to be able to go back and scoop up a student. And sometimes it just depends on the year and how much space you have in the class and whether the student is male or female identifying or non-binary, and whether you need more of that particular kind of student. And then you can go back and scoop up the student who you remembered, who you can say, hey, look, like, I know we're looking for a kiddo like this. Let's let's move this one forward to committee. And so, yeah, like, there is a lot to this that is sort of numerically based, and we try to make it as fair of a process as we can. And also, there are going to be parts of this process that are unpredictable and sometimes depend on the day and the time and the person. And that is frustrating and also just part of life, right? That's just sort of how things go.
Yeah, I mean, you know, some of our regulars may be sick of this, but I put my 10 favorite admissions quotes into my book I wrote. And this is
Yeah.
one from Christopher LaBounty, former MIT admission officer. And this is what he says: personality is something people think is not a factor,
Hmm.
but it is really hard in these environments for an admission officer, because remember, they are people, and this is a selective process, to give an offer to someone they don't like.
Yeah. But we do a lot. I mean, there are a lot of times when we'll make offers to students because they have the grades and the rigor, they have the academic profile, they've got the activities, and we may not feel like we really connect with them. But they have what it takes, and they've proven that. And we know that they're going to be academically successful and that they're going to be a good community member. It doesn't mean that I want to be their best friend, right?
Sure, sure.
But there are times when you admit students like that. And then there are times when you admit a student who, I'm thinking of another one right now, who I just looked back at their application yesterday actually and remembered like how poorly written the essay was. And yet the student is an outstanding student. My daughter called him legendary on our campus. Like, I mean,
It's
it's
pretty
someone
good,
who, yeah,
legendary.
which is why I went back to look at the application,
Sure.
because I was like, oh gosh, I don't remember a lot about this application. I went back to look at it and I was like, wow. I mean, I'm really glad we admitted that student because they're making a huge impact on our campus. And it's not a student who I would have known from their writing that they were going to be a standout among this class, but they're making a big impact. And some of that sometimes is due to personality. And so while we don't, there's not a way to sort of quantify that. It is certainly, it ends up being part of the process, not for most students, but
Sure.
occasionally.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, I think that's well said. And it's also, you know, the more selective the school, the more nitpicky people are
Hmm.
about
Yeah.
everything.
Yep.
I remember a student asking Janet Rappley, used to be over Princeton's office, like, what matters the most? They went over
Yeah.
this long list. And her answer was at a highly selective school, everything matters.
Yeah, everything does matter. Even here, where I think we're at 22% admit rate overall,
Yeah,
that we still look at everything, and
sure.
some things we can discount more than others. But
Mhm.
it's, each student is a little bit different, and the evaluation can look different depending on where we are in the process, what time of year it is, and what we need.
To what degree do you ever go back after? I know you're so busy, there's not a lot of
Mhm.
time for that, but do you ever find you go back and look at students like once they're in and go back and look at kind of the reader
Yeah.
ratings? And is that part of the formal process to do some
Unfortunately,
of that? Or do you
it's
occasionally have on an individual basis, if you want to do it, you can look it up in the computer? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I wish that we could. Unfortunately, we purge all of that
Mhm,
information once a
mhm,
student enrolls.
mhm,
So all that's left in their file
mhm.
is what they would have already seen, right? So their common application and their transcript. Um, I can't see reader ratings. I can't even see what I wrote, which can be really frustrating for me, especially if it's a school that I'm sort of familiar with, but I want to remember for consistency's sake, like how I looked at their transcript the year before, and then I go back to look at notes from the last year and they're not there. We have to purge all of that because otherwise, because of FERPA, we have students coming in wanting to see it, and that's fine. We wouldn't mind sitting down and sharing them with them. It's just the volume of requests we don't have time for. So we purge it all, which is a bummer. So then I do go back and look often when I'm trying to, like, especially with students who I get to know on campus after they get here. I'll go back and look as a reminder. Often it's like the captains of our ambassadors who I'll go back and look and see that they had like a C in physics their senior year. And it's a good reminder for me that students who end up sometimes being our best advocates for CC or our most successful students at CC aren't necessarily the students who had a perfect 4.0 and the perfect activity list or the perfectly written essay. That often it's the students who were sort of coming out of the shadows in high school who end up really making their mark on this place.
Yeah, no, all fascinating and interesting. And what I found fascinating is how different it is, because I know I've had multiple students at both Stanford and Michigan that have gone in, and Yale.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
only one at Yale, but multiple ones at Michigan and Stanford that have gone in and requested
yeah,
their, through their FERPA rights. And I've
yeah,
been surprised at how much, because they know, then they want to tell me, which is
yeah.
fascinating for me.
We used to do that, but it
And
just
reader
seems like,
ratings are there at some other places. Not everybody's doing what you're
yes,
doing, the purging.
yes. And our reader ratings used to still be there. I
Yeah,
think we feel like we need to sit and walk through that with students so that they
yeah.
understand the context of those ratings. And I think just to throw a student's file at them and say, sure, here's your file, sit in this room and look at it by yourself is sort of unfair because then they don't understand what they're reading. I mean, we spend 3 days training our readers on how to rate
I can get that.
applications,
That
right?
makes
And
sense.
so, and this is a CC is a very high touch, a very personal
Yeah.
place. And I would hate for one of my own kids to sit and look at their file without the context of understanding how we came up with those different ratings.
I can get
Because
that. Because when
I
I
think
look
it
at
could
the
be
things the
damaging.
students have said to me,
Yeah.
I think of a student from Michigan who came back talking about, wow, interest plays way bigger of a role than I
Hmm.
thought because they're kind of this comment, that comment, that comment.
Hmm.
Another student, I'm not going to say what school it was. I won't say what school it was. We obviously know it was either Michigan, Yale, or Stanford, but they talked about how one person was advocating for them in the reader rating,
Hmm.
the other one was not.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then they actually said in their writing, let's see what the interview report has to say.
Mm.
And then the interview report was like effusive. So he was like,
Hmm.
and so he
Wow.
came away knowing he crushed the interview
Yeah.
and he did well in the eyes of one reader and not another reader. And I was
Hmm.
thinking a little bit like, I'm all for transparency, but I don't know if I would want my students like knowing all this
Yeah.
stuff. And then they're all talking amongst each other.
Right.
So they're all telling each other, like, go in there and get your file.
Yes. Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
totally see why a school would not kind of want all that stuff out on the street.
Yeah. I think it's hard. I mean, I'm all for feedback for students. But at the volume that we have to offer feedback in that way, it's really hard. And I don't want students to feel bad about themselves. Like, what if a reader is reading it one day and doesn't leaves a comment that's not constructive or that's not glowing about a student, and then the student gets pulled back up and someone in committee loves them and advocates for them and they end up getting in, right? But then you still have, it's so hard to forget something that someone says about you that's negative or even just not wholly positive. And there are some students who have a really hard shell and can deal with that, and others who that comment is going to live with them for a long time. Why would we do that to
Well,
students?
another thing, now that we're in this culture of colleges, of schools losing their autonomy, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Who
Oh,
knows,
yeah.
like
Gosh.
what gets like,
Yeah. What ends up at the
depositioned,
federal
and then
government? Yeah.
yeah, it gets
That's
depositioned, and you would just
ugh,
rather not have to deal with all that, you know?
100%. Yeah.
Thanks, Hillary, as always.
Yeah. Thank you.
Friends, sometimes people ask, is there anything I can do to help the podcast? The answer is yes. I'm reminded of a former colleague I had when I worked at KIP who was from South Carolina. She had all these South Carolina phrases she used to use, but the one that always stuck with me was this: closed mouths don't get fed. So I'm not going to close my mouth. I'm going to ask for your help. You can help us by completing our 2025 listener survey and just being totally honest with us. What you like, what we can do better. And don't forget to let us know what colleges you want us to do college spotlights on. I want to thank everyone in advance who completes this survey. You can find it under your collegebounkid.com. Under the resources page, it's the first thing. Say listener survey, and I'll also make sure the link is in the show notes.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 2 of my interview with Peg Keogh, we start out by continuing our discussion about 6 missed opportunities that are common on both the FAFSA and the profile. Missing out here can cost you thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars per year. Peg lets us know how common it is for a family to erroneously list a grandparent on the profile or FAFSA. Peg explains the difference between FAFSA and profile. Peg discusses properly representing your secondary properties. Peg discusses representing the value of your business. Peg gives her advice about when to submit these forms. Peg discusses the confusion over school year. Peg discusses the confusion over the student and the parent in terms of whose FAFSA or profile is it to fill out. Peg discusses demographic details. Peg discusses FAFSA-specific missed opportunities, including some new ones now that the FAFSA has been revamped. Peg discussed the confusion over primary home equity. Peg discussed divorce, separated, and never marrieds and how the FAFSA policy has changed with the new FAFSA. I share a very real scenario encountered last year to show just how complicated things can get with divorce, separated, and never married families. Listen and enjoy. All right, let's talk about the next one. Categorizing 529 accounts owned by the parent as a student asset. Break this one down for us.
Yeah, so 529 accounts. If that doesn't ring a bell and you don't have them, don't stress. You can just, take a drink or you can tune out for 1 second here. So if you have college savings accounts, typically the parent owns it and then the student almost always is the beneficiary. And so that's an asset. And I get it. Most parents hear that and, "Oh, well, I'm saving that for my child. So that's their asset to use for college." That's accurate. You are going to use it for their college, but you own it. And so it's an asset of yours. So in that net worth of investments question, it goes under you. I've never, through all the years, seen a student as an owner. I will say I do see grandparents and other family members or friends as owners. See that all the time. If that's the case, then you don't include it on the forms. If grandma or your buddy from college who's really wealthy, who never had kids, opened up a 529 for your child, that's not included at all. But if it's parent owned, just jot that down. Make sure that goes under your net worth of investments, not your child. And the reason why it's so important is that assets in the student's name are assessed at 20 or 25%, whereas parental assets are assessed a little shy of 6%. So very big difference on how they look at those assets and how much should be spent for college.
You mentioned grandparent and wealthy other person. Do you see that? Do you see people put those on their forms, or is that really rare?
Usually they'll ask because they
Mhm.
get, oh, is this one of them? But the more common error is, oh, well, I'm saving for my child. It's their money, and you put it there. The reason why is because it is the owner's money. So at any point, that owner can say, this is based on an IRS definition. Yeah, I'm going to go to Europe with that money. I'm going to pay the penalties and the taxes. Whereas it's not a gift to the child. So that's like a little bit of background of why it is that way. Usually, when it's grandparents or somebody outside the family, parents realize, well, that's not mine. And so I don't see that as much. And one other thing I'll share, if you are divorced or separated, only the custodial parent on the FAFSA is sharing their information. So the non-custodial parent, if they own a 529, that also is not on the FAFSA because they're not on the FAFSA. Only the other biological parent is.
All right, let's look at number 3, overvaluing secondary real estate. So break this one down for us, Peg.
Yeah, so I'm making you made the distinction of secondary real estate. So this is not the home you live in, although you shouldn't overvalue that either, and we'll talk about it in a few minutes. But any real estate you have that's not the home you live in is disclosed on the FAFSA and the CSS profile. And they ask about it in different ways, but it's the equity that matters. So it's your market value minus any, if you have a main mortgage, if you have a home equity line of credit, all that gets subtracted. That's your equity. So if you overvalue your property, it's going to make your equity higher. So there are strategies to not overvalue. I will say in general, what you don't want to do is say, if the stars are all aligned and I get my dream price or I get 50,000 over asking, whatever, that's what I'm going to put as my market value. That's not what you want to do. You want to pick, the lowest defensible value. You never want to lie on these forms. Lying is wrong and it's fraud, right? But you want to find the lowest defensible value. And sometimes people just don't know. So they'll look on Zillow. And Zillow could be really inflated, and that's what they write down. And the colleges can look on Zillow too. But if that number seems good to them, they might not even go look, and they're probably never going to lower your market value. If they think you overestimated, they're probably going to say, well, they know more than we do about their value, about their property. So you don't want to, in general, you don't want to overvalue things on these financial aid forms.
I've heard some people say, think of it almost like what would be like the fire sale price of your property if you had to just let it go quickly. Do you feel that's like a
Yeah, it's
needed?
kind of the lowest. Yeah, the low, like I needed to sell it yesterday price is really what you're going for. And I know real estate, not as much, it's still doing well now, but how many years ago it was just flying? You could sell your house in 3 hours in the Seattle area. But now that's not the case. But yeah, that's what I tell people. You needed to sell it yesterday. You're not staging, you're not waiting for the best offer. Ask a realtor, look at comps, do a little research because that if it's included in this calculation, it affects your financial aid eligibility.
All right, let's look at number 4, which is overestimating your business value.
Yeah, so with the FAFSA changes 2 years ago, all businesses are included. They've always been included on the CSS profile. So this is I can't give blanket advice here because, everybody's situations are different. Some businesses have quite a high value. There's inventory. There's like, if you're a financial advisor, you have a book of business that has a value. But other businesses, like when I had my own business that I talked about at the beginning, honestly, if all of a sudden I got hit by a bus, there wasn't a lot of resale value. It was me. People were buying me and my knowledge, and that's common with certain types of businesses. So you don't want to overvalue it, and you might be putting zero there, and that's a completely honest answer. Not in all cases, but sometimes. And I think a lot of parents feel like, well, how can it be zero? That must be wrong. And so they'll make something up and it very well might be zero. So again, same thing as real estate. You want to be honest, but it could be zero and it could be a really high number or something in between.
All right, and the 5th one is missing priority deadlines.
Yeah. So deadlines in this process are key with admissions, with everything. And so when kids they choose how they're going to apply for admission. There's a corresponding financial aid form deadline for freshmen is always earlier than the upperclassmen. And you want to make sure you're meeting that deadline, especially if you're eligible for need based aid. Because if you miss that deadline, you're giving the college the opportunity. And I've seen it with freshmen and upperclassmen where they say, well, you were late, so you're getting less money, where you're in the second bucket when we award need based aid. So please don't give them the chance to do that. You want to get the money that they're going to give you. I always tell people, look at the deadlines for all your kids' schools and then shoot to get it in at least a week before the first deadline, because if all of a sudden you lose power, your internet goes down, you're not waiting till the last minute to get it in. The only nuance there is if it's a first come first serve school, you'll know that, then you need to get it in sooner. But yeah, you got to make those deadlines. And if your child isn't great at that, I was not a helicopter parent at all with my kids, but when it came to this kind of stuff, I was like, I need to see all those deadlines. You need to look them up because it's your money, it's your investment in your kids for their next chapter. And you really don't want to leave this endowment money on the table by missing a deadline.
Now, Peg, you mentioned you'll know it if it's a first come, first serve school. Can you elaborate on that?
I just said some schools are first come, first serve. If something 5 years ago, you'd read all over blog posts, oh, schools are first come, first serve. And they really aren't. Most of them are not. They
Yeah.
have deadlines. And if you Google it, you'll usually get to that part of their website where they tell you the deadline. But again, make sure you're paying attention to if your child applied early decision, early action, or regular decision. That used to be more the norm. And there was this huge push to get the forms in like day two. And they just have deadlines now. They have specific deadlines.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, we have a recommended resource for episode 559. An independent educational counselor who has to be anonymous reached out and shared a great resource that we can share with our listeners. It's a special offer for any institution and CBO, community-based organization, and it comes from College Unmazed. They are offering a free 90-day digital access to their entire bookshelf to institutions. Now, the preview is not available to IECs, just institutions and CBOs. Their entire bookshelf includes a lot of resources. They have a college planning and a box tool. They have a guide to dual enrollment. They have one for homeschool students. They have a student workbook and a parent guide. If this is of interest to you, reach out to Amanda Stirk at ASTERK at collegeunmazed.com. Let's talk about a couple others that I see. One is like putting the wrong school year. Do you see that where people get confused, but with the school year they select?
They can, yeah. Like right now, you can go in and actually submit a 24-25 FAFSA or a 25-26. And yes, that's common. Well, not common, but I've seen it. The other thing I've seen is where parents are super gung ho, not as much now with the changes, but they go in and they start it as themselves as the student. And I'm like, oh, now you're the student. It's okay. We're just going to start over here. You're not applying through the FAFSA. But that doesn't happen as much anymore because the FAFSA is completely revamped. But you just want to be careful that it's your student's FAFSA, it's your student CSS profile, and you're part of it. And, they're the student, they're the ones that are going to college,
Yeah,
obviously.
that was a very common mistake before this FAFSA simplification, where the
Yeah,
parent would do it and put in the parent's name.
exactly.
Another one I see is like some kind of misspelling on the student name. Do you see that at all?
Sometimes, or you see the birth date is off, or one of the digits on the social security number is off. And with the new system, when you create your FSA ID and password to do the FAFSA, it gets sent off to the Social Security Administration for verification. So, in theory, when they verify it, they should be checking that. We've had a few instances just this year at College A Pro where the birth date was wrong and they didn't catch it and it went through, right? Everything went through. But yeah, this is a time where you just want to, I tell people, if you're not near a deadline and you started the form, save it, go look at what you put in the next morning with fresh eyes, make sure it all looks right before you send it. But yeah, because sometimes people, it's not something to do quickly when you're tired. You want to be a little bit meticulous, make sure that you've got everything done correctly so it doesn't cause issues on the back end and down the road.
All right, let's talk about some FAFSA specific missed opportunities. So one would be including all of the kids' 529 balances on the form. Talk to us about this one.
Yeah, so if you, like in my case, I had twins, right? So each of my kids had a 529. This is new with the new FAFSA in the last 2 years. Remember, you're the parent, so it's going to go under your net worth of investments, but you only put the balance in the child's 529 that you're doing the FAFSA for. So in my case, with my kids, Brennan, I would put his balance on his FAFSA and Shannon on hers. It used to be combined. But on the FAFSA now, it's only one account. And if you've been fortunate enough to save a sizable amount of money in a 529, say $100,000, and you have two kids, putting 200,000, that's a lot more than 100,000. So you want to make sure you're only including the one child that you're doing the FAFSA for. And that's a new change. So that's an easy one to miss and not understand.
Yeah, I remember it used to really bother people in the past. Like, why do I have to report all of my kids, balances for this kid? Like, what about them? The fear was like, the next kid's going to need money too. And I feel like the school's going to take all of the money. I remember having those
Exactly. Yeah.
conversations and the angst that was creating. That was a nice
Yeah,
question.
that was a good change in my opinion.
Hmm.
That made sense.
So here's another one, including primary home equity on the form. And you touched on this earlier, right? This is why for the profile that does look at home equity, it's very different than the FAFSA. Talk about this.
Yeah, the FAFSA. So when we say primary home equity, we mean the home you live in. So that should not be included in that net worth of investments question. So if you own your home, you don't have a mortgage, it's worth 600,000 bucks, that's not included at all. As we talked about before, any other real estate is, but not your primary home on the FAFSA. So if that's for a lot of families, if you're lucky enough to your home or have a mortgage, that's the main property you have. And so it's off the table. It would just be your physical investments that you would include there.
And then designating the wrong parent as the custodial parent. This could impact divorce, separated, never marrieds. Talk about this. I literally had a question about this earlier today. So talk about this. This is a constant question you get in counseling is which parent should I put on here? Do you want to talk about that?
Right.
Because there's been some changes from the old FAFSA to the new FAFSA on this.
Yeah, so the old FAFSA 2+ years ago, the custodial parent was the parent where the child literally slept the most nights. And it's always been on a year look back from when you're submitting the form. It's not based on a tax year. So that gives planning opportunities. And I'm a planner, so I love all these planning opportunities that families can have. Um, the new rule is the custodial parent is the parent that provided the most financial support for that student or that child. Same thing on a year look back from when you're submitting the form. So if a family is submitting a form on January 20th, it's literally back to the other January of the year before. This is a gray area. Some families are 50-50. The way when they were divorced, that's what they decided. We're going to equally support our child. I always tell families, then figure out which parent is the most advantageous to submit the form. That parent spends a little bit more money on soccer or violin lessons or whatever it happens to be. You're following the rules, you're being honest. That parent is the custodial parent. On the FAFSA, the other parent is not involved at all. So it's a really important thing to dial in. That's another area. If you're not sure, you should get some help. I was just on a meeting earlier this morning with a dad, and we were talking through that. And he's paying child support, but that doesn't mean that he's the custodial parent. We had to look at what is mom paying for their daughter and bring that all together to figure out who that custodial parent is. So it can get a little sticky, and sometimes it's difficult if the two biological parents don't communicate a lot or don't communicate well. So that is a situation where maybe you need to get a little extra support from a professional to talk through it, because it can, again, could be tens of thousands of dollars you're walking away from if it's better for one parent to be the custodial parent, and it's not hands down, oh yeah, mom has definitely paid more. There's no wiggle room. If that's the case, that's the case. But quite often it is a discussion, because and also if you meet people wait, months before they're submitting the form, that's great because you have time to say, all right, now that we know this, how can I spend a little more, or maybe more than a little more, so that I can be that custodial parent in 4 months or 5 months or 6 months, and we're putting our best foot forward for our child on the financial aid forms.
Yeah, this is tricky for me and it's new, and I'm not sure how, like, what triggers an audit when the IRS sees like tax returns. Like I had a situation this last year where one parent made north of 450 and the other parent made under 30. And this is a divorce situation. And so they really were trying to see how they could report the under 30 as the custodial parent, or parent one, as they say, on the FAFSA. And I was a little uncomfortable with it because, you know, the family had the ability to pay, and it's not like schools have unlimited money. But, my concern was, gee, if you don't put the dad, they're going to see the tax returns and it's going to trigger an audit. But they basically went ahead and listed the mom, and they're paying peanuts at
Yeah.
the school. And it's not my job to get involved at some points, but that was just a tricky one for me to navigate. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I've had those through the years, even when with the old definition, I've had this, and um colleges can always question, right? They can always say, are you forgetting something? Are you sure this is right? And it can get tricky, like you said. I have had situations like that where there's a huge difference in income, and depending on where that child is spending most of the time, that can be a big deal. Because if the child's spending all their time with the parent that makes less money, and that parent is paying a mortgage and paying utilities and paying, that's all part of supporting that child. So that's where it comes into, yeah, in your example, Mark, he makes 450 or she makes 450, whichever parent that was. This other parent doesn't make as much. Alimony and all that, that's paid to the parent. That's not paid to the kids, and it's not earmarked for the kids. So when that parent gets that alimony and uses it to support the child, they're supporting the child. So every situation is different, and I've had a few of those too, where I'm like, my whole talk track is, if you're being honest, and you can honestly say that even if there is a huge gap, and if you're asked, you can say, this was our logic, this was our reasoning, then go ahead and do it, right? But if somebody's just like, I just want to do this because it's better, I mean, when I'm in those relationships, I'm like, you're not doing that with my advice. Go ahead and do it, but I'm not. That's not my counsel that you're following when you do that.
Well, the interesting thing in this case was they were trying to sort of dot their I's and cross their T's a little. So they did reach out and talk to financial aid. And what financial aid said to them was, we don't get involved in that, and we just trust that you'll do the right thing. And that's
Yeah.
sort of the response they got from financial aid. And so they proceeded to move forward. Friends, this concludes this part of my interview with Peg Keogh. Hope you join us next week for the next part.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, in part two with my interview with Greg Zeiser, Chief Enrollment Officer and 36-year vet and parent of an Elon alum and an alum himself of Elon University. Greg talks about the Elon Endowment. Greg talks about the Performing Arts program in Elon. Greg talks about some exceptional Elon programs that fly under the radar, but the faculty and the results are just outstanding for these majors. Greg talks about the 3 programs that Elon is best known for nationally. Greg talks about how all of Elon's programs are open to all students. Greg talks about the Accelerated Pathways program Elon offers, and he talks about how they are growing that at Elon. Greg talks about what Elon needs to work on to become an even better school. Greg talks about Elon's low tuition discount model. Greg talks about Elon's strategic plan. Greg talks about the 5 areas in the country where Elon has a regional staff member. Greg goes on the hot seat in the lightning round. And Greg shares what he learned from visiting colleges with his 2 sons. And he shares a hilarious story about his son, Luke. Listen and enjoy.
I said to someone the other day that, one of the unfortunate things is that a college experience is a 4-year experience in most cases, or at Elon it's a 4. And over 4 years, you don't see as much change as you do when you've been a part of an institution as long as I have, right? So I do think that the student who is looking at Elon 2 years from now will see a dramatically different Elon than the one that existed 2 years ago. And hopefully that will be, more reflective of what we should be. We're a private institution with a low tuition discount and a relatively low endowment. So it means that we have to work even harder to make sure that we achieve the goals that are important for education.
Yeah, we all know there's a financial component to this, right? So Bloomberg drops $1 billion on you for endowment and says, I want it all to go to financial aid. And you'll see a lot of changes at you and every other institution in the country, right? So we know there's a financial component. So what are some programs that you feel are really strong that fly under the radar? Like I think when people think right away of Elon, they're going to think a lot of things. Definitely your communications, right? That's what got Lisa. So Lisa was actually Vernon Hills, Illinois. Her daughter was from Vernon Hills, Illinois, and it was the strength of the communication program that allowed her daughter got in every school except one, and it was a nationwide search. But it was the strength of the communication program that drew her. So we know that's really strong. We know business is really strong. And then you got some really strong programs in like the performing arts,
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah. Some of them are very competitive. I've seen some really strong applicants that don't get through that with the auditions and stuff. But everybody on the inside kind of knows, we've got these other programs and maybe people don't ask us about them that much, but boy, that faculty's fantastic there and the results are there.
Yeah, I think 3 that come to mind immediately, and we've talked about one, sport management. There are very tangible reasons why sport management at Elon makes sense. And I've described those with the Charlotte National Center and so on. I think another one that I think is relatively new, but tends to fly under the radar because people don't know what it is fintech, financial technology. So finance in the business school, we have 14 different majors in the AACSB accredited school of business. But people don't hear fintech and say, oh yeah, I know what that is. This is fintech. The last time you paid with something with your phone, which I did this morning for my cup of coffee at the Oak House here in Elon, that's financial technology. And as we move to a cashless society, that's becoming obviously more and more important. And so what we're seeing is finance is still the big draw, but financial technology is sort of the future of finance. So I think that's another example. The other thing I would say is, and again, we've touched on this a little bit, but I'm glad you said when you think of Elon, you think of communications, which was my original draw 30 some years ago.
There you go.
I do not have a communications degree. I have a business degree.
Yeah.
But, and you also think of business. Yes. I also think a lot of times people think of education. We have the Dr. Joe Watts Williams School of Education is incredible. National Teachers of the Year, North Carolina Teachers of the Year. But I think those are those 3 major programs that people think of when they think of Elon. And what's happened over the last 5 years, I think, with the addition of new facilities to support engineering and other STEM fields, Elon is becoming as strong in those areas as we are in business and education and communications. It just takes longer to build that reputation. And we also know that NC State is one of our biggest competitors, and naturally, the North Carolina students who are interested in engineering often look at NC State and other great schools in North Carolina. Elon's engineering program is much smaller, is much more hands-on, I'm not going to say it's much more collaborative because I can't compare it,
Sure.
but I do know the kind of education that Elon is known for is delivered in a space that's quite different than a large-scale public institution offering a great program in engineering. So I think when you look at Elon, when we expand to the School of Engineering and Computing, we don't need to build a new building. We built 2 new buildings to build the program, and now the program has grown to the point where we can hire a dean and restructure so that we have that. The other thing I'll just say really quickly, Mark, is that one of the things that you've known about Elon for a lot of years is that there is not, with the exception of performing arts and nursing, there is no secondary admission process to the university. So the student who wants to study journalism does not have to apply separately to the Elon School of Communications. The student who wants to study entrepreneurship and innovation does not have to apply separately to the business school. You apply to one place, Elon University. Why are we like that? Because we're a liberal arts university at heart, and we want students to be able to explore different areas. And I think it's something like 20% of students will double major. And the deans of the schools with whom I work very closely will tell you, we love double majors, but we don't want students to double major within our school. We believe there's great synergy in having an engineering major and a marketing major, or a strategic communications major and a marketing major. And those are in different schools, and they really lend themselves to things. So that's another philosophy of Elon that I think has been very beneficial for students in making sure that they have opportunities. So it's a long answer to your question, but I hope that's helpful.
No, it's very helpful. It's also very appealing. I haven't shared this with you, but I have 2 daughters, both graduates of North Carolina schools who live in the Research Triangle. So my oldest went to Davidson.
Okay.
And my youngest, she did UGA undergrad, but she got her master's at North Carolina State and now works at Chapel Hill Keenan Flagler.
Okay.
But the reason I bring it up is because I was working with a student a few years ago from Colorado, and he ended up picking UGA over UNC because UGA does the same thing. There's no, you're not applying into majors or schools at that school. You could just get into the school and then pick business, where Keenan Flagler, the business school, last I checked, their acceptance rate was something like 44% for current students trying to get into the business school. And McIntyre, UVA, I know these are bigger schools, but families love direct admit programs. Which schools on this list would let my kid, if they wanted to go to business and change their mind, have the option to go to business versus, no, you needed to do that in the front end? Yeah, that's a big appeal.
Yeah. The other thing you just mentioned really quickly, I'll just add to, you commented on direct admit programs, and we have some accelerated programs at the university. So, PA and PT are highly selective at the graduate level. So we have programs where students can apply for a pathway that allows them to truncate their undergraduate experience and go right on into the graduate program. We have similar 3+1 programs in business analytics and accounting. So inside 4 years, you can have your undergraduate and graduate degree too. Special applications for those, but we also have a similar program with the Elon University School of Law. So as costs become increasingly a concern, and families are looking for ways to make sure that they get the quality education they're seeking, but also, maybe some other opportunities, accelerated pathways are growing, certainly at Elon, and we are finding that the students we have the highest yield among the students who are admitted to those programs who choose Elon because of what it offers them.
Families love those programs. Yeah, they love them. They love them. So in your opinion, what does Elon need to work on to become an even better school?
Yeah. Well, I think the first answer is my only answer, and that is, we're constantly working to be more accessible. Again, back to the financial model of low tuition, low discount. If you don't have high tuition, you can't give away large, discounts. So I think that continuing to focus on ensuring that students have access to Elon is really the most important thing we can do. Our strategic plan really calls for, all of those things but for a lot of things. But at the end of the day, that's what all of those things add up to, is ensuring pathways to the university, accessibility to the university, funding sources to help support students and families. We don't have a large, students don't graduate with a large amount of debt from Elon, and our default is 0% for students. So there's that. And we're monitoring those things too, because if those change, then we're not doing the right things for students and families.
What are the states where you've really seen a surge in enrollees? Like I
Yeah.
know for a long time, it's been quite a while that you've done really well in the Mid-Atlantic and in the Northeast.
Correct.
And it feels like you've really penetrated the Chicago area a fair
Thank
amount.
you for saying that, Mark. Yes, that was going to be my first.
Yeah, I get a lot of questions from that area about you guys.
Good. We added some regional representation across the country, and so we've had a staff member, a really strong staff member in the Chicago area for about 4 or 5 years now, and that has paid real dividends for us. We have a staff member living in San Diego. We have a staff member living in Seattle. That has proven to be, it's a small territory for us, but real growth opportunity. Someone in Charleston, South Carolina, because we know the South is growing,
Sure.
right? Florida, North Carolina, certainly growing. But also someone in Denver, Colorado. So
Nice.
Those are the places where we've done the analysis to see, okay, we could grow if we make the investments there. And as I mentioned, we do have students coming in the first year class from 50 states this year. So we're back to 50. Those Dakotas are tough, but we got there.
So listen, we have a tradition of no first-time guest gets away without going on the hot seat. I just want to ask you a couple quick, lighthearted questions.
Okay.
What do you wish your 18-year-old self knew?
I think what I wish my 18-year-old self knew was that schools want me more than I think, that they are really looking to partner with me and my family, as opposed to, I think families still have this notion, and understandably so, with the high levels of selectivity at many schools, that the first answer is no. And really, I say we're the admissions office. Our goal is to admit you.
Sure.
And so, I think that's what I wish my 18-year-old self knew.
Yeah, the media drives it, right? As
Changed.
somebody said
Yes.
once before, I write an article on Stanford, I get a ton of clicks. I write it on Samford, nobody reads it. So then, therefore, the dominant media culture is on how hard it is to get in all these places, and it really creates a false narrative. I see it because I'll have these incredibly accomplished students. They'll get in their first college and they'll breathe this sigh of relief,
Yeah.
like, they literally had a fear in their back of their mind they were going to get shut out,
Yeah.
which you and I know that's ridiculous, but we
Right.
know where that media narrative, what's driving that. So, yeah.
And that's why students apply to so many places too, because
Right.
everybody wants to be a part of something, and everybody
Yeah.
wants to, see their achievements recognized. So yeah, for sure.
You have a student who's at Elon now, but you learned some things from being on the other side. So what did you learn about admissions from being a parent
Yeah.
and having to look at it through the lens, not as an admission officer who's recruiting and worried about yield and budgets and net tuition revenue and all this stuff, but as a parent watching and observing all the communication and how that whole process. I've had a lot of people on here who have commented on that. Was really eye-opening for me.
I loved it. First of all, my son graduated 5 years ago, actually. So
Okay.
he's been out of Elon
Yeah.
for 5 years now. But I loved it because, my kids, I have 2 sons, they're 2 years apart. And so they're both out of college at this point in time.
Sure.
And as I say, one went to Elon. And they both said to me throughout the process, Dad, we're really kind of doing this for you. Meaning I was saying, let's go visit here. Let's go visit
Right.
there.
Right.
And they would say, we're doing this because you want to see the school. And I would say, no. They were right. They were right. But all of that is to say, we visited the schools that they wanted to, but
Sure.
I learned so much from, the value of, I remember being on a campus and we had a tour guide and the provost approached the tour guide and they had a relationship. They knew each other.
Yeah.
And even though you and I and all of our listeners know how powerful that can be, when you're in that moment and you see that, you really feel it. And I left that campus and I came back to our university senior staff and I said, folks, it's really powerful. I just experienced that. I took things from, there were things that I thought, oof, I would never do that. And there were things I was like, we want to do that. And we came back and we replicated what I saw at other schools.
Is there another example you can give of either without mentioning names either?
Okay.
No, I'm definitely not doing that. If that didn't feel good, as well as let's implement that here. We can do it.
Sure. There was one that we left the campus, and we went into it thinking it was just going to be the information session and tour, and it was. But they also had a faculty member come in and sort of teach a class, and it wasn't long, and it was not in a subject. I don't even remember what subject matter it was, but it was just sort of like but it gave me a sense of what the quality of the faculty experience is in the classroom experience. And I don't know that maybe I didn't read enough, or maybe they just surprised us with that, but I came back and we replicated that for a period of time, and it served us well, I think. And that was one example. The other thing was some of the things that we talked about, direct mail. There were some things that we implemented and still use today because I went to a particular school who does, I think, a lot of things right in terms of their promotion. And I thought, okay, this makes sense. And so we adopted that and continue to this day. And it's been, almost 10 years or more than that, since my sons were looking at college. So there are a lot of takeaways. And there are a lot of things too. The email, that's the other thing. Mm-hmm. Folks, I know families, we wish they would answer more email, but how can you? They're just inundated with email. So
you got to feel what that's like, seeing how much email your kids got.
And my kids really did. I mean, it sounds like I ran this process. I did not. I never really. They had their inboxes.
I mean, you're going to be admissions curious, right? You just are. You would be in the profession. So.
Right. Can I tell you a real quick story before we go? Sure. So my youngest son, who I'm just going to tell on myself here, he very independent, and obviously, I work at Elon. I love Elon, and his brother was attending Elon, and he applied to Elon. I did not obviously read his application, and he was offered admission, and then it was at a certain point in the cycle in the fall, and we had our first withdrawal. And this was a period of time before I think we were on Slate, and I could look to see who withdrew. So I called and I said, "Who withdrew?" And it was not a deposit, of course, but it was like the first withdrawal of the year, and it was my son. So I went home and I said, "Luke," I said, "Luke, this is what happened." And he said to me, "Dad, you always say that you wish students who weren't interested in Elon would withdraw their application, which creates opportunity for other students." And I thought, I love this kid. And, you don't know how your children listen to you, but that was a very powerful moment. There are so many powerful moments I could share, but that was really powerful for me. And he ended up going to another school in North Carolina, had a fantastic experience, and my boys had two great experiences at two different places. So.
Yeah, that is awesome. That is fantastic. Greg, you've been most generous with your time, giving us almost an hour 20. I really appreciate this. It's a school. There's a lot of interest on the part of our listeners, and so I know this will be widely listened to. If somebody is really Elon curious right now after what they've heard, what would you recommend as be their next steps?
Yeah. Well, naturally, we'd love for you to visit. But the other thing I would just say too, and I know you have lots of visitors and lots of listeners, but I mean this sincerely. When I go to conferences, feel free to let me know when you are coming. If this business, if this work, if this is truly a relationship built experience, then I want to help foster that from the very beginning. So I'm happy for families to reach out to me. It's just my last name, Zaiser @elon.edu. But we'd love for students to visit and let us know we're visiting and we can say hello. But obviously, any kind of information that families are seeking, obviously the website is going to be the best resource. But if you want to develop a relationship and have someone who's watching for your interests in your application, Elon's the kind of place that wants to do that, and it starts with all of us here on the staff. So it's let us know how you want to engage with us, and we will engage with you.
Thank you. This has been fantastic, and I look forward to seeing you at No Name or I don't know if you're going to do if you do NACAC or SACAC. I usually do both of them.
Usually the smaller ones. So I find No Name and some other things like that are to be the most valuable. So. But awesome. Thank you for the invitation, Mark. This has been fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks to everybody.
Friends, I absolutely loved interviewing Greg. He was so honest, so real, so transparent, and that sets the stage for the whole school. It starts at the top and trickles down. And it's these honest and transparent thought leaders that, for me, are the most fun to interview, and I believe are the most helpful to you, our listener. So if you found this interview to be helpful, shoot Greg an email at ziser@elon.edu. That's ZAISER at elon.edu, and tell him specifically what he said that resonated with you. It's a tough job being a chief enrollment officer. Your email will make his day and maybe even his week. Friends, on Monday's episode, you'll hear part 2 of the panel discussion with 5 students, all aspiring to be lawyers and 2 partners of law firms. You'll also hear part 2 of the interview with Bob Massa, explaining what he is learning from these admissions audits his company is conducting and what we can learn from them as well. And Susan will join me for that interview. And friends, never forget, you do not have to go to a highly selective college to have a great life. And you do not have to go to a highly selective college to crush it when it comes to your career. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. Big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed, and you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify, and if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Escobar in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Matvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stalionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.